I don't want to touch them. What you touching? Who you? How y'all? I smell the bleach.
Take this out to talk, and then we do have the hand sanitizer right here, Carol. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We've had to, as you can see, move back into our press room because with the information that I wanted us to be able to share with you, it's best doing it in this environment, particularly needing to use electronics to be as clear as possible based on what we're wanting to share as it relates to where we are and where we are going relative to the financial position and situation of the city. You've heard me talk about, where we are as taking some time to do our due diligence as it relates to digging into the data that will guide us, and not just as it relates to the community spread of the virus, but also looking at the data to drive us financially with making decisions to ensure that the city of New Orleans is fully operational and that we are stable. So in order to solve a problem, just like me, it is very important to understand what the problem is. And my administration has spent the last several weeks, over an 8-week period, being very much focused on understanding how deep the financial situation is with the city, particularly to a deficit. But at the end of the day, it's understanding the problem that we are facing as it relates to COVID-19 and moving from crisis management into recovery mode for the city. We have taken into account really where we've come from. You'll see this as Gilbert will give you the presentation. We are taking it from as far as 2008 and upward, where we've come from, where we are, and of course painting the picture in terms of where we're going as a city. I've asked Gilbert to share with you some of the highlights that we have been combing over, and also that we will be presenting not only to you, to the council, and to the public as we just move forward. This continues to be a very fluid situation, but in order to manage our way through it is absolutely letting the data drive us. But taking you through that historic economic timeline, it will provide you with a better understanding in terms of where we are today. This has been unlike any disaster that we faced as a city, and really any other challenges that we faced as a city. It's different in many ways. As it was a challenge that required a detailed, data-centric focus, again, waiting to do our due diligence, combing through the data, and letting us truly guide where we will go and need to go to ensure a steady operation of city government. The most important thing that I've asked from my leadership team is, again, that we remain steady in delivering basic city services to the public, those who live here, and even those who visit the city of New Orleans. We understand that we came into this COVID-19 pandemic very strong as it relates to a financial position of the city. And it really contributes to some of the decisions that my administration had to make coming really out of the gate. We're now about almost two years in our administration, but even taking the very focus of using zero-based budgeting practices, for example, something that we started, again, looking at financial stability for the city. That exercise allowed us to, one, take a closer look at how the city through years was utilizing one-time money and reassessing the use of that, but getting off of just this pattern of one-time spending that would only cause an issue for the city after the fact, and wanting to get out of that practice. Even as it related to getting into the budget season, we were very much focused, and even as we to the New Orleans City Council that we continue to grow that fund balance, that it was very important and vital that we do that. Our rainy day fund, leave it alone, but grow it. And not even knowing that we would deal with the pandemic, but even how we've been able to deal with whether it's the cyber attack with Hard Rock and the many other tragedies that we faced as a city. But even with all of those things coming into this pandemic again, being very financially strong. So we're optimistic in terms of where we are, but even as we focus and fight for the federal dollars that we are advocating for to help aid the city in the revenue losses, again, that we are experiencing. But we're not facing this as with the thought of the cavalry coming from the federal government, but more of wanting again to save ourselves and come up with a strategy that we can deploy and we could have confidence in and giving it to the public, that we will remain financially stable and sound. That also speaks to us kind of taking a step forward with getting a certificate of indebtedness. Again, being very forward thinking in our approach, being very proactive in our approach. So should we need cash flow, that we would have access to it, and not wanting to, an analogy of a car running out of gas and then you say, oh, where can I get the money to get more gas? We do not want to be in that situation. So we're continuing to lean forward. We're continuing to be proactive as it relates to the financial stability of our city and where we are and where we need to go. We are exploring, as I mentioned on Friday, saying that more was to come, and that's what this is all about. We were very adamant of requesting cost reduction plans and strategies from our department leaders throughout the city. I referenced last week that those were due to us on Wednesday, that April 29th date, in which our leaders responded very well. But it blends in, and they will blend into a cost reduction strategy as we move forward. And I told you that everything was absolutely on the table. So we are exploring cost cutting measures, and even as relates to early retirement, an incentive for early retirement is something that is on the table. Even as it relates to various contracts, even where sanitation, for example, we reduced the pickup in the French Quarter last week to 1 day a week, looking at a savings of about $800,000. But we're looking at that strategy even moving forward on the residential side. Again, nothing is going to be left off the table, but we are looking at cost-cutting strategies to implement as we look to being prudent and sound, moving this city forward. Tomorrow, that my administration will go before the New Orleans City Council's Budget Committee, in which we will be providing a presentation about the certificate of indebtedness and even more information. But all of that is aligned with the city's liquidity. Again, access to cash when and should we need it. But I will weave back in, but right now I think it's time to walk you through the presentation, and I'm going to ask Gilbert, our Chief Administrative Officer, to do just that. I'll be right here and I'll interject as I need to, but he will give you a very comprehensive presentation that kind of speaks to where we've been and where we're going, but how we have utilized over 8 weeks of digging deep and letting the data drive us. So with that, Gilbert, if you don't mind coming forward. Before you do, you're gonna sanitize yourself as I've touched this podium. But I'm gonna do the same and just kind of move over, put this mask on. And while the presentation's here, you'll be able to follow it as he goes.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. As the Mayor said, for us to really evaluate and understand where we're going, we have to dissect and understand the problem in order to figure out where the solution is going to go. And one of the challenges we've been facing since the beginning is really the lack of complete information. And when you're dealing with budgets or mathematics, not having complete information to make decisions is certainly an inhibitor, and this has been exacerbated even further as we did our analysis for the COVID-19 pandemic. So where I'm going to start, which is important to level set, is from a macro perspective. So we're going to look from the macroeconomic perspective because that is certainly where you start translating from the economic scenarios, which then drive your fiscal scenarios. So I'm going to take us back, and this is what most economists and others related to this type of work will start, so you can have a trending scenarios and understand where you're going. So if you want to start with the first slide, what this first graph shows you right here is where we were post the Great Recession. This is in 2008. The kind of frere blue line on the bottom is Louisiana. And what I wanted to highlight here as part of the framing is we never really reached where we were after the Great Recession. This is us right here, whereas the rest of the country. So why this is important is it shows we had not quite made it back up to normal time. And the main reason, and one of the things that you want to really focus on when you're doing and studying and working on this, is your GDP. This is an important indicator to look at. It's an indicator of the size of your economy and the growth rate as far as what is being spent and how sales tax dollars are being utilized. What's vitally important is to show in Q1 we saw a 4.8% drop in GDP, and what's being projected for Q2 is a 26.5%. Now this is our U.S. GDP. This is unprecedented. We've never seen a time in our lives where we've seen double-digit drop in GDP in quarter 2 or any quarter again. Why that's important helps us guide where we need to do some of our analysis and our assumptions. What I wanted to show on the second graph, all part of the framing once again, is a couple of major economic hits that the state and the city has faced. One is the Great Recession, and the second is post-Katrina. If you look at the negatives on the columns, you'll see that what we're looking at right now is very similar to what New Orleans saw post-Katrina as far as your GDP drop and adjusting related to that. That helps us frame from a budgetary and financial perspective where we need to start looking and guiding our decisions moving forward. The next slide, I thought this was an important slide to really show, and I apologize for some of the details of it, but some of this information is very analytical and it's not simplistic. And in order for us to really understand it, we had to dive very deep to see where the city was going, because you never just want to look at a period of time when you're dealing or managing a budget. You want to look at an overall year, 5, 10-year growth, and look at your past to really determine what you're going to be evaluating. What this particular slide demonstrates is you look at the y-axis and your x-axis. What the x-axis says is how many years post turning the city back on at some level when the economic activity starts beginning again, how many years these various cities will take to regain economic flourishing again. What the y-axis provides is what makes New Orleans very vulnerable to this. And you'll see it's way over there on the corner. And really it's the prevalence of our transmission, our hospital system, and the health of our population. And why this slide's important is because if we were too early to open the city back up at some level, because of what's happening on the y-axis, this could prolong what our pre-COVID recovery could end up as. And this also is an important framework to understand what we should be looking at in the future moving forward in the budget. And you can see it in comparison to what other cities are dealing with there as well. We can go to the next slide.
And we were further back. We were further away, or 5 years. Now it's moved it in to at least a 3-year mark, but how we're looking at the data and how it shifts based on those variables, it just matters.
Yeah, so what the mayor was saying is that, sure. what the mayor was saying, originally when we were doing our analysis, New Orleans was a little bit over here, but with the transmission of and the decline of our deaths and some of our active cases, we're slowly moving this way. Now, once again, there's no absolutisms in any of this work that we're doing as far as analysis go. Things change every single day, as well as they do in the economy. But this sets a baseline kind of where we can start evaluating post-recovery time. And as our momentum gets, more full and more thorough, based on this health vulnerability index, we'll be able to continue to move closer toward, a shorter time to recover. Okay, we can go to the next. This is a busy slide. This looks very full. Basically, what I wanted to articulate here is you have to look at all the various scenarios through the world. And what these scenarios identify are the options of recovery. What seems to fit New Orleans well based on our modeling is the muted recovery. That's A1. And what that takes into account is also a regression. You have to be able to manage through, because you have to understand that there's going to be periods where we'll move forward, and if there's an outbreak, we have to go back. All that is factored into your economic analysis. What seems to make the most sense, and what experts agree and that we've been working on, is the A1 resurgence as far as the muted recovery growth. And that's important because what the next slide is going to provide is our sensitivity analysis. Now, a sensitivity analysis is hypothesis-based, but it's very pragmatic in how we evaluated where our various gross receipts were going to be provided. So you'll see we have 3 different scenarios, 3 different sensitivity analyses that we have been moving forward. First, you see the muted recovery, and then you look at it through $130, $150, $170 million lens, and you'll be able to see with each revenue stream the changes in what you have to collect moving forward and where we would be. And that helps us monitor on a month-to-month basis what adjustments and where we have to change related to that. The next couple of slides will be a little bit more quickly, and we'll distribute these to everyone else. But so that these numbers don't appear in any sort of way arbitrary, or we're just putting them out there, there's some significant data that went into our assumptions. And if you want to go to the next couple of slides, different visuals of the same data that shows linear graphs that can provide the same information, mostly driven by the indicator of GDP. And then the last graph is the almost the advanced analytical assumptions that we have been driving to then promote where our deficits have lied. And that, in some ways, takes us and frames us in totality of what we have been studying and analyzing. Now, all of this information is vital to have the important data coming in, and it's taken the time, and we've been working on it to ensure that we have the right data to provide so that we can make calculated risk and analysis as we move the city forward. What the mayor said, and what's vitally important, is a steady continuity of services, and that's something that we've been focusing on in its entirety. But on the reverse, we wanted to be very, very thoughtful and prudent on what type of assumptions and where we're wanting to go. The cuts and the decisions we make as an organization affects people's lives. And you want to be accurate, you want to be thorough, and you want to be advanced on how you're deciding to move forward with those changes. So that sets the framework, I hope, for some of our large picture macroeconomic scaling. And now I'll dive a little bit more into the fiscal scenarios on where we are today, and then open it up for questions. I'll get into the budget reduction plan and where we'll end up, and I think we'll be open for questions. So we can go to the next one, Jeff. So this is a little bit of an oversimplified version of probably something similar you see in your bank account, just with different numbers, of course. We are, this is fiscal year, which happens to coincide with calendar year. Our fiscal 20 budget was $725 million. So far, we've spent, and it's May, and this is, I think, about a week old, $218 million. So our overall budget expenses are $507 million. Now, when the mayor talks about the COI, Certificate of Indebtedness, or the long-term deficits, you have to take 2 different frames and understand 2 different perspectives. You have your short-term liquidity issues, your day-to-day operations, then your long-term deficit. So why 2020 is going to be viewed differently than 2021 is simply because of your cash flow and your liquidity measures that you have to take into place. So if you take down the next stage, you'll see our expenses. Now, this is preliminary. As the mayor said, the department directors provided us their budget reduction plans on Wednesday. The reason we took a very thoughtful approach in that regard is we wanted, as the mayor said, to empower our directors who better to provide budget cutting savings and knowledge on how that'll affect the operations that our own directors. We believe that there is some ability to cut somewhere between $35 and $50 million based on their assumptions. And I will get into some of the details of that information. Now understand, and I'll qualify it with, that has to be more thoroughly analyzed and articulated. This is not something we're gonna be very rash over, and this is one of the reasons that we wanted to take the important time necessary, because this will mean augmentation of operations and things of that nature. So we have to be thoughtful and deliberate and not unilateral in any sort of way on some of those savings. But they are real, and there is some strong confidence amongst the leadership team that we're going to be able to implement a significant portion of that. The $16.7 million was our surplus coming in absent of a rainy day fund balance, or the overall cash position. So as the mayor said, we came into pre-COVID financially strong, and that's an important testament to the work of the administration and some of the decisions made by the council and others alike. Is the structural balances that we have fought for, the advocation of the fund balance and the reserve, have simply allowed New Orleans to weather a longer period of this time than many other cities, despite the significant impact that we are going to be facing. So you couple those together, and then you see what could be potentially our shortfall. But once again, I'll go back to that shortfall based on the assumptions that you saw were extremely detailed and complicated and can vary at any given time. So everything is a little complex and moving, but at least we have data and knowledge and understanding to be able to move forward as the city. The other graph next to it gives you a little bit more of my revenue stream that is affected currently, and what the impact is right now post-COVID based on our GDP indicators and our actual collections. Everything, once again, is unaudited, and it is not, and in some cases, hypothesis-based. We can go to the next slide. I thought this is important. This just sets a framework for what other cities across the countries are doing. And we are not alone in this, in any sort of way. This is just a snapshot. This is a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure it's changed since then. Cities across the country are facing these revenue losses. What's going to make New Orleans unique, and what the mayor has charged us with, certainly, is we will advocate and fight for our federal funding. However, in some cases, we may have to handle this on our own, and we're prepared to do that. In order for us to handle it on our own, I'll go and talk a few items on our budget cuts, and then get into some of the personnel spend to be able to weather and manage it through. But I thought that was just an important backdrop to see some of the decisions other cities have made. We are being very thoughtful, and we're using certainly a scalpel instead of a hatchet to make some of these cuts, but they're significant. So some of the agencies in particular, the public safety agencies, there is anywhere between $10 and $12 million of savings identified by just stricter and tighter controls of our overtime usage. Some of that is a ripple effect of the cancellation of budgeted overtime for some of the events that have been canceled. That is one of the things that you look at when you're evaluating a budget. What are your cost drivers? What is exploding your budget significantly? Overtime is always a significant cost driver. Being able to hone in and rein in just stricter controls and permission granted for overtime creates significant millions and millions of dollars of savings, and we need them now more than ever. Sanitation, as the mayor has discussed, is a opportunity for the city to move forward, as we're seeing, and we want to be thoughtful in what ultimate decisions come out, and it'll be a process certainly, but there is some unique contractual obligations that are very heavy in cost that may not be as beneficial in service, and we want to be thoughtful about each and every one of those particular contracts. And as the mayor said, we moved to 1 day of pickup, 1 pickup a day in the French Quarter. It is very unique to have across the country 2 trash pickups a week, and And so certainly things like that have to be on the table. In no way do we say that this is ultimately, but I think we have to put everything on the table as we have with furloughs, layoffs, and things of that nature. What we have always said that we want to protect is the livelihood of our employees. In order to make some of those decisions in a prudent and efficient sort of way, we have to look at our contractual spend as well, and that's certainly one of them. Now, I'm looking at the other side of the equation too. The city is very rich in assets. We have evaluated a significant portion of our time, as the directors have provided, the ability to monetize our assets. If you look around the city, you see some very high trafficked areas that are public facilities. And there's been some great work over the course of the last several years to monetize those type of buildings and in some ways liquidate so that we can provide adequate funding for other operations. We have, as one of the cost-cutting measures, shifted our general operation dollars to our capital dollars. This has created millions of dollars of recommended savings as well. Back to the contractual spend, DPW has done a great job providing some analysis on our enforcement measures. So you look at our parking enforcement measures, you look at our red light camera enforcement measures, you look at things of that nature, and you understand that where we're heading is more of a limited capacity. So do we need and value the amount of work that has to go into some of our parking enforcement, other type of enforcement measures if the public is home more often? And you have to look at those at a different scaled basis, certainly to understand where you're going for some of these decisions. So in that regard, limiting the amount of enforcement and then back, going lower on our contractual spend will certainly provide, it's two sides of the cost. So less enforcement actually costs the city less money. And that's certainly one of the things we have to evaluate.
And that also speaks to personal responsibility, meaning the public, what they will be asked to do with, with some of these measures if they are enacted.
Each agency, and I know the mayor's office and my office have combined close to $4 million in our own contractual cuts. So we're taking it out of our own departments as well. This affects everybody, and we want to make sure that's on the table. And it's important to lead by example in that regard. So I know the mayor's office, and then certainly my office, is really evaluating every one of our contractual spend. I have the same hiring freezes as the mayor does and everyone else in the city. We maintain our hiring freeze, and I see that for the future, and that's absent of our public safety employees. We do not want to regress in that regard. And as far as our contractual spend, each of those are being evaluated by our office as well, so that we are limiting the amount of cash flow that is needed to be expended.
And even looking through, the equity lens as it relates to the contractual obligations as well.
And lastly, as the mayor said, we're looking at opportunities to incentivize early retirement. This has not really been advanced since the late 80s. Our research shows, I think 87, there was some movement in this regard. There is a significant amount of analysis that had been done to be able to provide those employees with X amount of service and X amount of years to be able to early qualify for early retirement. We think it prudent to be able to provide that same opportunity moving forward as we essentially, in some cases, we have to shrink the workforce. As much as we love to say that our efficiencies are going to provide the completion of this information or the closing of the gaps, absent, and remember, I'm speaking absent of any federal dollars coming in, and we're very thoughtful of that in the sense that we don't want to be over reliant or dependent on money we still haven't seen to this day. And we're in constant conversations with the state, and I know they're working out, and they've been great partners in that regard, but there is some lack of clarity from other agencies that is providing a limit to the velocity of those funds. So we want to, like the mayor said, manage our own issue as much as possible. But even with those changes, there's still going to be a delta over the course of what we have to actually close. So certainly we've done an analysis of furloughs and an analysis of layoffs. But once again, we don't want to not say that without having the information on where our assumptions and projections are going. It could be so detrimental to an organization and to a city to artificially cut costs without having true basis and knowledge to justify those cuts, and that's what we're being very thoughtful of.
And we owe that, you know, to the public, but we owe that to our employees as well. This is not a time to get rid of, it's a time to figure out, you know, how we can remain steady and provide the best services to the public through government.
Right, and we're embracing the new normal as well, and that's reflected in our operations. So I think in closing, what we'll present to the council, what we presented to you all as partners in the media is the bigger picture, how it fits into where we are going, the movement related to some of those sensitivity analysis, where we drive the cost reduction side on the expenditure side, what other implementing measures we have to take, we have to go all the way down to the worst case scenario, and how we're able to adjust if there's a resurgence related to COVID-19. All factors that are vitally important when you're evaluating your portfolio. And I'm not just looking at expenditure cuts, as I said, there's monetization opportunities that the city has. With that, Mayor, I will turn it
Well,
back.
let's give a little shout out to our partners with, McKinsey. You know, just, we've been working very well with.
Sure, I absolutely, absolutely. I think that we had some significant support with our consulting partners. I know McKinsey has been at the table with us, and there's a lot of goodwill and opportunity. We had some external work done, and it's just been all hands on deck, and certainly our directors have been stepping up. And you know, our finance office, Norman, would have been here today, but he's on a plane, and I know he's done significant work as well. So thank you.
Thank you. So we'll answer questions, probably mostly for Gilbert Recession. I have my mask on. Anyway.
Yeah. So, once you all have cut your budget as far as you can go, and you know, it had to do the early retirements and everything, are you all getting any inkling from the federal government, like what you are going to have to do before they can come in and help? I mean, is the federal government even, is there any, at this point, is there any inkling that the federal government is going to be able to help with all these budget shortfalls?
Right now, so the last conversation I had with the governor's office that is managing this implementation is that the information is still related to expenditures. So what you've spent on COVID is what you may have as being reimbursed. There is no revenue loss. What we project and what our assumptions really have, the totality of our loss is our revenue loss and the services related to those various sectors of our revenue stream. Expenditure-wise, up to date, I may be close to $5 million, and if you factor that in over the course of the year, it's going to be significantly less than what the federal government has provided, and I think you'll see that throughout the state. So in some ways, there has to be a reevaluation. We don't have that information yet. So, and to answer the question, is there any criteria of what the city has to cut prior to receiving funding? No, I've heard nothing of that nature. I think that is our due diligence, and I think what we have to prudently continue to do in preparation for worst case scenario, so that we have continuity of services and we flourish as a result of it. I think that's the most important part of why and what we're doing as far as an organization.
No, that's good, and just, you know, being proactive, really showing and demonstrating that that's what we're doing on the ground, which I believe that the federal government would appreciate that. But we will continue to advocate for gap financing as it relates to the revenue losses that we know that we're seeing and will have.
So I just have one more question from our reporter. It says, how much is the budget now? How much are we looking to reduce it without federal help? And are public safety, sanitation, DPW, and incentivizing retirement the main ways to remedy the budget?
Right, and I don't want to overcomplicate the answer, but I think what I just tried to show in the presentation is there's not a single answer to that question. It's based on assumptions, and it's based on modeling, and it's based on what we deal with on any given day as far as cash and where we project some of those responses to become. It can vary. We've always provided a level of range. I think you've seen everything from $100 million to $170 million budget deficit. And what we just have to do is prepare for any of those sensitivity analysis that I tried to articulate now in the presentation.
WDSU. All right, with the amount of new cases still seeking care for coronavirus in hospital space, Would you say that we're on the right path for opening for May 15th, and what would be the worst case scenario if you weren't?
Now, your question, give me that again.
With the amount of new cases, those seeking care for coronavirus, and hospital space, would you say that we're on the right path for opening for May 15th?
Well, the city is definitely on the right path to not having new, right? We're not on an incline with new cases, so that's not accurate. We're on a decline of new cases, so that puts us in moving in the right direction to begin to pivot towards a phased reopening strategy for our city. So we are on the right path because we are experiencing a decline of new cases, which is a part of the criteria spelled out by the federal government. So we're looking at a decline of new cases as well as deaths, but you have to focus on the new cases. And it looks good for the city of New Orleans.
Anything else for issue?
Yes. What should NOLA businesses know ahead of the reopening phase?
What should NOLA businesses
Yes.
know before?
Yes.
Well, one of the businesses can very much concentrate heavily now on their contact tracing guidelines that will be specific to their business, so that any of their customers or employees contract the virus, that there is a way to do contact tracing that is aligned with the Louisiana Department of Health. So I would say the businesses begin to plan their contact tracing guidance or guidelines for themselves to operate in this new environment.
Is that it, the issue? The lens.
Mayor Cantrell, I couldn't help but notice some of the steps that Las Vegas is taking here, and obviously this is something you've dealt with before, but I'm wondering if you're taking a second look or having any more thoughts about the allocation of hotel taxes in the city and whether those should be shifted given the current crisis.
Well, I think based now, we're still factoring in the fair share agreement, which has shifted based on the amount of revenue that we're all making at this time. But I believe that as we move towards the end of this year, remember, we still have over close to 40 million in taxes that will be rolling off as we look into 2021. So that is something that we cannot change. It's baked into, just to how those taxes will roll off. So it's baked into the formula already. So I do believe that we still have an opportunity to look at the taxes that we collect, that taxing structure, but associated with that 40 million right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So less on the hotel motel side of things, but more on the 41 million that will roll off if we do not re-up. But in thinking about re-upping is our opportunity to reassess, and that's what we're going to do. So Gilbert, you can make it plainer to me. I can't even understand myself.
No, I
Feel like I'm muffled.
I think you said it very well. The renewal of the millages and how we evaluate that today is very different than what we discussed, pre-COVID. And I think that's our opportunity.
The lens. Last question, the lens.
I'm wondering if you could give us some of what you're seeing on these department budget reduction plans as they've been rolling in. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to kind of look at all of them and aggregate, but is it personnel reductions, contract reductions? I mean, what are we looking at as the major cost-saving measures that department heads are recommending?
Sure. And I'll try to be global with that answer. I think you have to look short and long term, and I'll also bring in a little bit of the COI because I think this is a question also related to that as well. When you're evaluating some of your budget reduction plans, whether it's here or anywhere else, you look at the low-hanging fruit. What are you currently contractually obligated to, and what remains encumbered but maybe not spent? You look and determine if those services are still provided or needed, or are they more on a limited basis. We have certain say, janitorial contract services that are designed and funded to be cleaning entire buildings. Right now, not all those buildings are being utilized. So how do you shred and how do you cut some of those particular contracts? That's your low-hanging fruit. From there, you look to longer encumbered funds for overall shifts in policy, which brings us to some of that sanitation conversation that we're dealing with, just as a global example. Then you look at your, then it's, the most rational to look at your personnel side. And you start with your cost drivers, and that's where we started with our overtime. How can you control your overtime? From there, you then limit to what operational capacities do you need. Do you have to have all your centers open every single day for the hours that they previously did? Is certain volumes in different areas, can that be tailored to adjust to what some of the phased-in openings can provide? And you look at those services. As I mentioned as well, if cars are not being parked illegally throughout the city because people are at home, do you have to engage in the size of contractual services that we have with external partners? Similar to that with some of the red light camera contracts as well. Now, there is legal analysis that has to be done on every one of those last topics, so those aren't necessarily the low-hanging fruit, and that is why you spend your time and your diligence to ensure that you're making the right decision and what the operational outcome is. Which brings me, what I wanted to articulate on the COI that we're discussing tomorrow, because the question may arise, is that why now do this before federal funding in that type of conversation? And once again, the action tomorrow particularly only allows the city the opportunity to move forward in that regard. You have to fill your toolbox with as many tools as possible. One thing the government cannot do is stand still or stop. We have to maintain public service, we have to maintain public safety, we have to maintain drainage, cleaning, and all of the like. What you don't want to do is what the mayor said, wait till your car's out of gas before you decide to go to the gas station. So tomorrow, what that will be providing is to allow us the opportunity, if needed, to create and inject an infusion of cash so that we can maintain the remainder of 2020, because as many of the cuts that I just described are huge, right? They're gonna take significant work, they're gonna take the proper analysis, and they're gonna take a lot of fine-tooth combing. We will not have the time to go through every one of those cuts in 2020. Those are months of work and analysis, and then sometimes you have to repivot and change. So we want to be able to have the flexibility for the long term, and that's the reason, the rationale that we're discussing the COI tomorrow.
The advocate?
A couple questions. The savings from public safety overtime you said was 10 to 12 million, and the personnel savings is 16.7. What's the difference there? Where's the extra 4.7 million coming from?
So they're totals.
Okay, so that's on top
So
of.
so the overtime is built-in budgeted amounts for those agencies that, based on reduction of activity, essentially, parades, events, things of that, festivals of that nature, we're able to squeeze off budgeted overtime. The personnel spending savings, one has two aspects of it. Essentially, the majority is the hiring freeze that we've implemented. So although many of those positions that had been budgeted and approved, a significant portion of it, absent of public safety, certainly again, have been stalled or in many cases not hired, and so that creates that personnel savings. So there are two different line items on the budget. So not to be conflated. And once again, the 10 to 12 is the department's recommendation. We have to go and analyze and thoroughly advocate for that. I am comfortable on the 16.7 on personnel projections. That's the surplus coming into this that put us in that sound fiscal position as far as pre-COVID.
So, and just to be very clear on that, that doesn't involve any layoffs or reductions in hours or anything for current employees, that's just employees that aren't being hired essentially?
We have not factored in layoffs, furloughs. We've done the analysis, right? And when that time, if or when that time has to come, depending on what we're watching, we will be prepared. However, the projections and the analysis you've seen do not in any way they don't reflect any layoffs or furloughs. What the hiring freeze also does not reflect is you have to pick a period in time to stop where your analysis goes. So if I picked 2 weeks ago to stop the hiring freeze, that doesn't account for other future attrition dollars that can come thereafter. So so that number can get bigger, is my point, for the 16 million, if more people do retire. As we look at the early retirement discussion, there's another cost to that. In complete thoughtfulness and totality, we have to look at the cash out of some of that signification. That puts a little pressure on our liquidity, depending on it, so we have to be thorough and thoughtful of that. So what may sound as a very simple way to save money, in some ways, if not planned accordingly, can have a bottom line effect to you.
Any other questions?
And just curious, the scenario that you guys are looking at right now, apologies if I've got, or correct me if I've got this wrong, because there are a lot of slides there. You guys are looking at a $130 million scenario, which if I was reading the slides correct, estimates that bars are going to be back at 90% revenue by July. Is that right, or?
I think I'm not exactly sure. So there's two different things to that answer. So one, the final slide where we go to what is based on our current data provided by finance as far as our collections does show that. What I believe you're talking about on the different scenarios is part of that sensitivity analysis. And once again, that's hypothesis based, and that's a very kind of global term as far as where and how those numbers shift. That would be the muted recovery. I guess I'm not understanding the detail of your question, but the 130.
I guess maybe the better way of asking this is, the scenario that you guys are looking at right now is based on assumptions that things will be more or less normal, or will be into phase maybe 2 of the city's plan by what point? Is that a?
I think certain, and I apologize. It's not easy. It's not.
Sure, no,
It's just not simple.
It's not, yeah.
Because remember, we have 9 revenue streams that are affected. So in some cases, your answer is yes, back to pre-COVID times. In other cases, the vulnerability matrix identifies that it may be 3 years before we're back to some of the travel dollars that we had once had, according to that. So it's varied on almost every financial sector. So I'm sorry I can't be more clear. It's not, you can't just pull out a calculator and explain the answer, because it has so many moving pieces. Unfortunately, government budgets are very complex. I don't know, maybe I'm not articulating it well, but they're very complex as far as how to answer direct questions related to when and how those dollars
Well, they're just trying to simplify when it cannot, it just can't be broken down to apples and apples, oranges and oranges.
Madam Mayor, no other questions?
Thank you all so much. We appreciate you. And thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you.